The fog rolled through Rome's ancient streets like a living entity, searching, probing. It crawled between weathered buildings, wrapped around marble statues, and settled into every shadow of the eternal city. Deep beneath the Vatican's towering walls, in chambers hidden from mortal eyes, two figures waited in absolute silence. Father Sebastian Michalski pressed his back against the cold stone wall, feeling the dampness seep through his cassock. His scarred face bore witness to battles he'd never speak of aloud. The jagged mark running from temple to chin caught the flickering light as he turned toward his companion, a reminder of claws that had nearly ended his life. The older man beside him wore the weathered robes of a Dominican friar, each thread telling stories of decades spent in service. Father Paolo Collini had witnessed 8 decades pass, like pages in a book. His white whiskers framed a face that had seen things most would dismiss as impossible nightmares. "So, what brings you to this delightful gathering?" Michalski asked, his voice carrying traces of his Eastern European heritage. Collini managed a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I see you haven't lost your sense of humor, Father, even in the face of catastrophe." "One needs humor in this line of work," Michalski replied, his gaze fixed on the massive oak door before them. Its iron hinges had witnessed centuries of secrets. "Though I suspect we'll need more than jokes tonight." The chamber they occupied had stood since medieval times, its stones mortared with the blood of martyrs. Ancient tapestries covered walls that had absorbed countless confessions, prayers, and screams. Tonight, those walls would hear something far more disturbing than any whispered sin. Collini checked his watch with trembling fingers. You'd think after 2,000 years, the church would learn punctuality. As if summoned by his words, the great door began to creak open with the groan of ancient wood. A young priest emerged from the shadows beyond, his pale face reflecting the dancing candlelight like a ghost stepping from the underworld. "Reverend Fathers," he said, extending a trembling hand that shook like autumn leaves. "Please follow me. They are waiting." The two men exchanged glances, heavy with unspoken knowledge. Whatever awaited them beyond that threshold would shatter their world forever. They rose from their chairs and followed the young priest into the unknown darkness. The chamber beyond defied mortal description. Hundreds of candles cast writhing shadows across walls lined with tapestries that predated nations. The air itself seemed weighted with centuries of secrets, pressing down upon them like the judgment of history. At the room's center sat a long table carved from wood older than memory, its surface scarred by the weight of momentous decisions. 3 cardinals occupied high-backed chairs behind the table, their faces stern as marble statues. The man in the center possessed features that commanded immediate respect and fear. His dark skin spoke of distant lands, while his penetrating eyes revealed authority earned through decades of service in the church's darkest corners. "Fathers," he said, his voice echoing through the vast space like thunder in a cathedral, "I am Cardinal Boniface of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith." He gestured to his companions with deliberate precision. "Cardinal Petrelli represents the Secretariat of State. Cardinal Michel serves as special liaison from the same office." The young priest took his position at a side desk where a modern recording device sat incongruously among the medieval surroundings. Its presence added technological weight to the ancient ritual about to unfold. "This hearing will be recorded for posterity," Boniface continued, his words carrying the finality of a death sentence. "We have been appointed by His Eminence Cardinal Bertinelli to investigate the events that have shaken the very foundations of our faith." Michalski and Collini took their seats in leather chairs that creaked like old bones. The sound echoed ominously in the otherwise tomb-like silence of the chamber. Please state your names and positions for the record, Boniface commanded, his tone brooking no evasion. Carlini cleared his throat, the sound reverberating in the vast space. Your Eminence, I am Father Paolo Carlini, friar of the Order of Preachers. I serve as professor of medieval history at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. The whole truth, Father, Boniface pressed, leaning forward like a predator, sensing weakness. Carlini's shoulders sagged under the weight of revelation. I also serve as chief exorcist and chair of the Department of Demonology at the Pontifical Institute of Occult Studies. All eyes turned to Michalski, like spotlights piercing the darkness. Sebastian Michalski, Your Eminence, Society of Jesus, Professor of Pathology at La Sapienza University, Chief Pathologist of the Institute's Biological Division. Cardinal Boniface opened an enormous leather portfolio with the reverence of a priest opening the Bible. Documents spilled across the table before him, like accusations waiting to be voiced. We are here to discuss the incident of September 27th. We have already interviewed the other survivors. The word survivors hung in the air, like smoke from a funeral pyre, heavy with implications of terrible loss.
We have also conducted an exhaustive investigation into the Institute's activities, Boniface continued, his voice growing colder with each word, including a complete review of your late colleague, Father O'Hara's research.
Michalski's jaw tightened at the mention of O'Hara's name, muscles tensing like a drawn bowstring ready to snap. This has been a colossal shock to those in the Curia who have been briefed on these matters, Boniface added, his words dropping like stones into still water. Cardinal Petrelli leaned forward, his rotund frame trembling slightly as he spoke without humor. Shock is a profound understatement. Your Eminence, we are accustomed to scandals of every conceivable nature, but this particular situation has required measures beyond our most extreme protocols. The lengths we have gone to contain this matter have been unprecedented in church history, he continued, mopping sweat from his brow with a silk handkerchief. Fortunately, we have managed to present the incident to the outside world as a scientific accident. The public and the wider church have accepted this explanation. For now, added Cardinal Marchal, his hawk-like eyes fixed on the two priests with predatory intensity that made the air itself seem to thicken. Public relations are the least of our concerns. Boniface interjected sharply. We have 16 documented casualties. At least 12 personnel remain missing and are presumed at large in the city. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet, as if death itself had entered through the ancient stones. This includes Father Merchant, whose whereabouts had been unknown since the gendarmerie discovered his letter at the Hotel Bourges 3 days ago. Carlini's eyes widened with sudden hope that flickered like a candle flame. Father Merchant survived the incident.
We ask the questions here, Father. Boniface snapped like a whip crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. You, Dom Collini, are reputed to have performed more exorcisms than any living clergyman, yet none of the exorcists known to our congregation have heard of you in this capacity.
The fellows of the Institute are bound by strict vows of secrecy, Collini replied, his voice barely above a whisper. We have maintained these vows for 8 centuries, through crusades and inquisitions, through wars and plagues. Is this true, Father Michalski? Boniface demanded with renewed intensity. You know it is, Your Eminence. You have already examined our archives thoroughly enough to know our history better than we do ourselves. Boniface's frown deepened into a scowl that could have cracked stone. Riley's facts stated for the record. The Church's official position has always been that vampires do not exist, yet your institute has been dealing with them for centuries. The word vampires seemed to echo endlessly in the chamber, bouncing off ancient stones like a curse seeking its target, reverberating through the very foundations of faith. Among the volumes we discovered is a 12th century manuscript of particular interest. Boniface continued, his voice taking on the cadence of an inquisitor preparing for judgment. De vampiris alias daemonum incarnatis. Are you familiar with this text? Kalini nodded slowly, each movement deliberate and measured.
Of course, Your Eminence. It was written by Bernard of Clairvaux, principal associate of our founder, Saint Alpheus of Chartres.
The text describes vampires as reanimated forms, possessed by infernal powers. Boniface stated with clinical precision that cut through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. Is this correct? Yes, Your Eminence. Bernard was quite specific in his descriptions and theological interpretations. Does it explain their origin? Collini shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the leather creaking ominously. Bernard notes that tales of vampire-like beings appear throughout human history, across all cultures. However, he speculates that the first true vampire was an ancient priest who fell into apostasy during the early days of the faith. Named, Boniface pressed relentlessly, his voice demanding absolute truth. Simeon the Apostate. According to ancient texts, he was a high priest, excommunicated for practicing forbidden arts that violated both divine and natural law. The candles flickered as if disturbed by an unfelt wind, carrying whispers from the underworld, their flames dancing like tortured souls. He offered his immortal soul in exchange for eternal youth and power. Collini continued, his voice growing hollow with the weight of ancient horror. The demon accepted the bargain, then destroyed his soul and possessed his body completely. What does destroyed his soul mean in practical terms? Cardinal Pettorelli inquired, leaning forward with morbid fascination that belied his scholarly demeanor. The demon terminated his natural life and expelled his spirit to the underworld. Collini replied with scholarly precision. What remained was a perfect vessel for pure evil, unmarked by human conscience or divine grace. This possessed form then created other vampires? Boniface asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. We believe so, though the exact mechanism remains unclear, even after centuries of dedicated study. Not all victims undergo transformation. Only some who are attacked undergo the change. Michalski leaned forward. Suddenly, his scarred face reflecting the candlelight. It involves a specialized enzyme produced through modified anatomy. The transformation requires specific conditions that we've spent decades trying to understand. I will address you shortly, Father Michalski, Boniface said with icy authority that could freeze blood. Now, Dom Collini, the text claims vampires can be neutralized through specific means. Fire, sunlight, decapitation and destruction of the heart. Is this accurate? Yes, though the heart can only be destroyed with stakes made from ash wood specifically blessed for this purpose.
Why ash wood?
Cardinal Michel asked, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Legend claims ash was one of the woods used for the true cross. Vampires are also vulnerable to Euphorbia milia, the plant associated with the crown of thorns, and to consecrated silver. Silver's effectiveness stems from its association with betrayal and redemption, Collini added. But Father Michalski can speak to the biochemical factors involved in these vulnerabilities. Boniface continued his relentless interrogation with the precision of a master inquisitor. Vampires can be neutralized, and this has been the Church's primary method for dealing with them for centuries. Yes, Your Eminence. It was considered the only viable solution for protecting innocent lives. Who was responsible for this systematic elimination? In the year 1156, Pope Adrian IV directed Saint Arthius to form a secret order of warrior priests. Thus was founded the Order Militum Sacri Cordis, the Order of Knights of the Sacred Heart. The history lesson continued with mechanical precision, each word weighted with centuries of hidden warfare that had shaped the Church's secret history. In the 16th century, the order was reconstituted as a secret division, the Pontifical Swiss Guard. In 1967, Pope Paul VI directed the Institute to adopt a revolutionary new policy, focused on research rather than elimination. If vampires are truly demonic entities, surely the Church has attempted exorcism, Boniface asked, his question hanging in the air like incense. Coligny averted his gaze like a penitent, avoiding the crucifix. No, Your Eminence, never in our recorded history. Why not? The prevailing view has been that vampirism is primarily a biological phenomenon requiring a biological solution. Michalski interjected, his scarred face twisting with remembered pain that spoke of personal experience. Boniface turned his full attention to the scarred Jesuit like a hawk, focusing on its prey. Your late colleague, Father O'Hara, was the first to discover that vampirism is caused by a viral pathogen. He proposed the theory and confirmed it through extensive experimentation over many years. Michalski replied with scientific precision.
You have been developing a medicinal treatment?
My team and I have been working on a cure for the past 15 years. Yes, we believed we were close to a breakthrough. Boniface's eyes fixed on Michalski's prominent scar like a prosecutor examining crucial evidence. How did you acquire that mark? Michalski's jaw squared with remembered terror that still haunted his dreams. I was attacked by a subject during routine testing. The creature nearly ended my life before the guards could intervene with specialized restraints.
That is why you were not present during the September 27th incident?
Correct. I was hospitalized and heavily sedated at the time, recovering from my injuries. Previously, were any subjects in your custody intentionally neutralized? Yes. During the first decade of the project, several studies confirmed traditional claims about vampire vulnerabilities. That was before O'Hara's and my involvement. For the past 15 years, all subjects have been preserved for study and potential treatment. B. Boniface leaned back in his chair like a judge, preparing to deliver sentence. Your considered professional judgment was that vampirism could only be transmitted through direct physical contact. That was my position based on all available evidence. Yes, every case we studied followed that pattern. When the trial vaccine was developed, the Holy Father summoned Father Merchant from Washington specifically to evaluate testing it on live subjects. That is correct. Father Merchant was considered the foremost expert on supernatural ethics. Cardinal Perarelli interjected with barely contained agitation.
Had you not been incapacitated, you would have sided with Father O'Hara and agreed with Father Merchant's verdict to proceed.
Without question, Michalski replied decisively. I had no reason to anticipate the catastrophic consequences that followed. To this day, I cannot explain them through any scientific principle. You and Father O'Hara believed vampirism was partially an infernal phenomenon. Cardinal Petrelli continued relentlessly. Why did you not favor Don Collini's recommended course of exorcism? Michalski's expression hardened like steel being forged in fire. Our position was that the N81PH virus causes humans to transform into demonic entities, not the reverse. Exorcism would likely accomplish nothing, but the subject's destruction, medical intervention, we believed, could eradicate the virus and restore the human host completely. Or so you thought, Boniface said brusquely. You claim to have no scientific explanation for why the vaccine backfired so spectacularly. Matrosky looked away, his voice becoming hollow with defeat. There is no scientific explanation for what occurred, none whatsoever. It defies every law of biology and physics. Then perhaps you can explain why multiple individuals, including Father O'Hara and presumably Father Merchant, became infected despite never being physically attacked by any subject.
I cannot, Mission replied in a tone that spoke of shattered faith in science itself.
Boniface turned back to Collini with renewed intensity that made the air crackle with tension. Is it your position that neutralizing the subject's physical forms somehow facilitated viral transmission? Yes, Your Eminence. My theory is that N1PH is merely a particular manifestation of demonic possession. When the undead bodies are destroyed, this liberates the possessing spirits, allowing them to infect others through spiritual contamination. But the Church has been hunting and eliminating vampires for centuries, Boniface said, his voice rising with confusion and concern. Were there previous instances of viral transmission through this method? Not that I, or anyone else in the Institute's records knows of, Collini replied gravely. According to Bernard's writings, souls of innocent people destroyed by vampires ascend to God. When the vampire is properly eliminated, the demonic entity returns to the underworld, just as other demons do when successfully exorcised. The room fell silent, except for the scratching of the recording priest's pen across parchment and the distant sound of wind through ancient corridors that seemed to carry whispers from the past. Can you state for the record what transpired following the neutralization of the vampire known as Thomas Love and Father O'Hara's subsequent transformation? Boniface asked with deadly seriousness. Kalani shuddered visibly, his entire frame trembling with the memory. As Father Merchant stated in his written testimony, Swiss Guard members heard a violent disturbance in the laboratory. Upon entering, they discovered Father O'Hara in the process of transformation. They subdued him using our standard restraint protocols. They tended to my injuries and took Father Merchant, who had lost consciousness from shock, to the infirmary. We soon discovered the horrifying truth. O'Hara had administered the experimental vaccine to all 24 subjects in our custody. All underwent the same rapid transformation as Thomas. I informed Father Merchant immediately once he regained consciousness. That is when we began hearing screams throughout the facility. The candlelight seemed to dim as Carlini continued his testimony, shadows dancing like demons celebrating their victory over human science and faith. Father Merchant fled at my urgent recommendation. I rushed to the main hallway with a team of guards. We immediately witnessed other guards engaging Institute personnel who had evidently become vampires within minutes of exposure. Who authorized the use of specialized weapons? Cardinal Mukhli inquired sharply. Captain Ostini, acting on my immediate recommendation, Collini replied without hesitation. Why did you make such a drastic recommendation? Many medieval scholars argue that consecrated flame is the most potent weapon against such creatures. Perhaps I was thinking of this instinctively, or perhaps divine inspiration guided my decision in that moment of crisis.
Was this course of action successful? Cardinal Pettorelli asked, with clinical interest.
We neutralized 8 vampires with the specialized weapons, as your investigation confirmed, but at least 12 escaped into the city, including the former Father O'Hara. No further infections have occurred within Vatican City since that day, Boniface observed with obvious relief. That is correct, Your Eminence. The contamination appears contained within our walls. You believe the consecrated weapons are responsible for preventing further spread. Your guess is as good as mine, Reverend Cardinal. We are dealing with forces beyond our understanding, beyond science itself. Boniface sank into his chair and stared at the towering vaulted ceiling that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of saints. Here is our current situation, fathers. All facts regarding this incident, including the Institute's very existence, have been suppressed at the highest levels. Obviously, more people are aware now than before the incident, but only within the most senior levels of the church hierarchy. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like dust from a collapsed cathedral, each syllable carrying the burden of centuries. The Holy Father will review these findings alongside all others and make his final determination regarding our next course of action. I must tell you, though, that he already has certain strong inclinations about how to proceed. He intends to close the Institute permanently, Michalski asked, with barely concealed anxiety. Boniface shook his head slowly, his expression grave as a funeral mass. On the contrary, Father, the Holy Father believes this incident may indicate a novel and unprecedented supernatural threat to all of humanity. For this reason, he strongly favors re-establishing the Order of Knights of the Sacred Heart and immediately resuming full-time vampire hunting operations. The two priests stared at each other with wide eyes, the implications crashing over them like a tidal wave of divine judgment. If this becomes his ultimate directive, it will fall upon you and other senior Institute members, along with your compatriots in the Swiss Guard, to fulfill his sacred wishes. Your first priority will be locating the missing personnel, particularly Father Merchant. That is all, Fathers, Boniface pronounced with the finality of a funeral bell tolling across the eternal city. The hearing concluded, but the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to unfold in ways that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about good and evil. Father Simon Merchant stood in his room at the Hotel Borges, 30 stories above the bustling Via Crescencia. The structure rose like a modern Tower of Babel into the star-filled sky. Trembling and drenched in cold perspiration, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had witnessed, the priest felt the world spinning around him, the horror of the laboratory, the transformation of his colleagues, the implications for humanity itself. It all crashed down upon him like a mountain of guilt and despair. The room began to blur and fade as consciousness slipped away from him like water through desperate fingers. His legs buckled beneath him, and Father Merchant collapsed to the floor, his mind unable to process the supernatural catastrophe he had witnessed. In that moment of complete surrender, everything went dark. To his startled amazement, Father Merchant realized he remained conscious, his mind functioning despite his body's apparent collapse. He found himself standing in a place that defied all earthly description, surrounded by brilliant light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. I should be unconscious, he thought in the infinite void of his awareness. That remains to be seen, replied an ethereal voice that seemed to come from the very fabric of existence itself. With growing awareness of his physical form returning, Father Merchant slowly opened his eyes to behold a brilliant night sky, ablaze with stars that seemed to pulse with divine energy. A chilly breeze swept over him, rippling his cassock like waves on a dark sea. From somewhere far below, he could hear the distant sound of traffic continuing its eternal flow through the ancient streets of Rome. Pulling himself upright, with movements that felt guided by unseen hands, the priest surveyed his surroundings with awestruck eyes. He was standing on the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, hundreds of feet above the city streets, the impossible height defying every law of physics and probability. "I hope you are not afraid of heights," the ghostly voice said behind him with gentle amusement that carried the warmth of eternity. Turning with a sharp movement that sent his cassock whipping in the wind, Father Merchant saw a beautiful, statuesque woman in a billowing snow-white coat that seemed to glow with inner light. Her golden hair whipped around her porcelain face in the night breeze, like a halo woven from starlight itself.
Who? What are you?
Merchant stammered weakly, his voice barely audible above the wind. The woman crouched down gracefully and fixed her piercing blue eyes on him with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The corners of her mouth curved into a radiant smile that could have melted winter itself. She placed her hand on his trembling shoulder, and immediately he felt nothing but warmth and perfect calm flowing through his entire being like liquid peace. "I am Shamash," she said, her voice now clear and distinct as crystal bells ringing across heaven's vast expanse. "Are you an angel of the Lord?" Merchant asked with reverence that seemed to sanctify the very air around them. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in paradise, giving Merchant a playful wink that somehow contained infinite wisdom. "I suppose that is what you mortals call us now. Be still and listen carefully. The evil that befell you has been lifted completely from your soul." She gestured to her left, where Merchant saw a vaporous, cold black cloud hovering in midair above the precipice, like a nightmare-given form, writhing with malevolent energy that seemed to corrupt the very air around it.
This is the shadow, the demonic entity that dwelled within you, seeking your complete destruction. Had you succumbed to despair completely, it would have consumed your soul entirely and immediately possessed the nearest innocent passerby. My master has seen fit to prevent this catastrophe.
"You mean the Almighty God?" Merchant said in a whisper filled with reverence that seemed to make the stars themselves shine brighter. Shamash nodded solemnly, her expression taking on the weight of cosmic authority. "Indeed. But why has he intervened in your particular case?" "Because your earthly work is not yet finished. Simon Merchant, my master gives you this choice. Obey his divine will and live to serve his purpose, or deny him and face the eternal consequences of that rejection." "Why me? What does the Lord want from me?" Merchant asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment and his own insignificance in the face of divine purpose. The angel glanced at the cloud-like specter that writhed with malevolent energy, its very presence a mockery of all that was holy and good. "The ancient enemy is abroad in the world, yet something fundamental has changed in the spiritual realm. What you witnessed in the Institute is unprecedented in the history of creation itself. You are among those specifically chosen to wage war against this new darkness." "I do not understand any of this," Merchant replied, utterly bewildered by the cosmic scope of his situation and his role in events that seemed to transcend mortal comprehension. "It was no mere coincidence that the Church summoned you from America," the angel continued, her voice taking on prophetic weight that seemed to echo through eternity. "You will understand the full purpose in time, but now you must choose your path. A sacred covenant has been offered. Should you enter into it, the reward is life eternal, and the cost is faithful service. My master will always be at your side, through every trial and tribulation." She paused, her expression growing gravely serious with the weight of eternal consequences. "If you decline this calling, the consequence is what you originally sought through your despair. But you shall not suffer the torments of the underworld. Only the eternal pangs of your own conscience shall be your punishment. The Master has said, no greater love is there than to lay down one's life for a friend. You are his friend if you keep his commandments faithfully. Tell me what I must do to serve. Merchant beseeched, falling to his knees on the ancient stones of the basilica's dome. You must leave this place immediately and remain hidden for 40 days and 40 nights. During this time of preparation, you will receive further divine guidance through prayer and contemplation. You shall not speak to any mortal soul during this period. You shall speak only to the Almighty and his holy messengers. Do you accept this sacred calling?
Father Merchant stared into the angel's luminous face through tear-filled eyes that reflected the glory of heaven itself. With slow deliberation, he crossed himself and exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders. All around him, the night sparkled and shone with supernatural light that seemed to transform the very air into liquid gold.
I am the servant of the Lord, he whispered with absolute conviction that rang through the heavens like a bell of pure faith. Let it be done according to his holy will. The angel smiled with radiance that could have illuminated the darkest corners of hell and vanished like morning mist, leaving only the scent of lilies and the echo of celestial music that seemed to linger in the air like a promise of redemption. Following Colony's and Mikowski's intense inquest, a terrific storm erupted over Rome with supernatural fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the eternal city. Rain fell in torrents upon the ancient streets as pedestrians rushed desperately for shelter from the deluge that appeared to carry the wrath of heaven itself. Among them was a young Carmelite nun named Sister Immaculata, en route to her chapter house when the tempest descended like divine judgment upon the unsuspecting city. Pulling her black mantle over her white habit, she ducked into a narrow alley where she found temporary refuge from the downpour in a damp stone alcove that had sheltered pilgrims for centuries. In the momentary flash of lightning that illuminated the world in stark white, she saw what appeared to be a priest standing motionless on the other side of the flooding alley, his dark silhouette framed against the storm's fury.
"Father," she shouted over the storm's deafening roar, her voice barely audible above the thunder that seemed to shake the very stones beneath her feet.
Motionless and obscured by shadow, the priest said nothing in response to her call. A moment later, he began to pace slowly toward her, across the flooding cobblestones, his movements strangely fluid and predatory, unlike any human gait she had ever witnessed. The priest stopped close enough that she could hear his raspy, labored breathing, yet far enough away that his face remained completely concealed by darkness. When the lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene in harsh detail, Sister Immaculata's eyes widened in pure terror, and her mouth fell open in a silent scream that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The glowing yellow eyes and gleaming razor-like fangs that appeared before her in that terrible moment of revelation were the last thing she would ever see in this world. But this was only the beginning of Rome's darkest hour in centuries, the first note in a symphony of terror that would soon engulf the eternal city. As the supernatural storm raged above the eternal city, like the fury of disappointed angels, deep in the Vatican's most hidden chambers, emergency protocols activated with military precision that had been refined over centuries of secret warfare, red lights, bathed corridors that had remained dark for decades. Swiss guards moved with practiced efficiency through passages known only to the highest levels of the church hierarchy, their weapons loaded with specialized ammunition blessed by the Pope himself, according to rituals dating back to the Crusades. Cardinal Boniface stood in the Institute's devastated main laboratory, surveying the destruction with the eye of a general assessing a battlefield after a catastrophic defeat. Overturned equipment lay scattered across the floor like the bones of some mechanical beast torn apart by supernatural fury. Broken glass crunched beneath his feet with each step, the sound echoing ominously through the chamber. The metallic scent of the experimental vaccine still lingered in the air, like the smell of spilled blood mixed with corruption itself. "How many subjects escaped into the city?" he asked Captain Ostini, his voice echoing off the damaged walls with the authority of centuries. 12 confirmed missing, Your Eminence. Possibly more. The exact count is difficult to determine, given the extent of the destruction and chaos. In the containment protocols activated throughout Rome, we have specialized teams monitoring every major thoroughfare, train station, and airport. Nothing gets in or out without our knowledge and approval.
Boniface nodded grimly, his weathered face reflecting the weight of centuries of church history and the gravity of the current crisis. The church had faced many challenges throughout its long and tumultuous history, but none quite like this supernatural catastrophe that threatened to expose secrets hidden for generations. The enemy they now hunted possessed not only supernatural abilities but also intimate knowledge of Vatican operations and procedures.
"What of the survivors from the Institute?" Boniface asked with clinical efficiency. Brothers Kalini and Michalski are in protective custody within the Apostolic Palace. They are providing tactical advice to our hunting teams based on their extensive experience with these creatures, and the Institute's classified records, secured and classified at the highest possible levels. Only 12 individuals in the entire church hierarchy have access to the complete files, and each access is logged and monitored. The Cardinal walked to the laboratory's main window, his reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass that seemed to weep with the weight of tragedy. Below, Rome continued its nightly rhythm, millions of citizens unaware of the supernatural threat now loose in their ancient streets like wolves among sheep. People hurried home through the rain, never suspecting that creatures of nightmare moved among them in the shadows, hunting with predatory intelligence. Double all patrols throughout the city. Boniface ordered with military authority that brooked no argument. Institute an immediate curfew for all Vatican personnel. No one moves alone after dark, and all movement must be reported and approved through proper channels. "Yes, Your Eminence. What about the missing personnel?" "They are no longer personnel, Captain. They are targets to be located and neutralized with extreme prejudice, using whatever means necessary." As Captain Ostini departed to execute his grim orders with the efficiency of a lifetime soldier, Boniface remained alone in the devastated laboratory, contemplating the magnitude of the crisis that had befallen the Church. The Vatican's darkest secret had been unleashed upon an unsuspecting world like a plague of biblical proportions. The ancient war between good and evil had entered a terrifying new phase, one that would test the very foundations of faith itself and challenge everything humanity thought it knew about the nature of reality. Somewhere in the labyrinthine city, Father Merchant waited in hiding for further divine guidance that would shape the course of the coming battle. Somewhere else, creatures that had once been men of God prowled the rain-soaked streets, driven by an insatiable hunger for human blood and the dark purpose of spreading their corruption. And in the depths of the Vatican, the Church's greatest minds worked feverishly to understand what had gone catastrophically wrong with their centuries-old plans and how to prevent